You know, my
I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the California Winemaker special series. Across these 4 episodes, recorded in February and March 2023, we'll be going in depth with 4 producers, each of them a member of the California Wine Export Program. Guests reflect a range of locations, production scales, and philosophies. So another massively up-to-date and in-depth exploration of California wines. Subscribe to be alerted when new series episodes go live. We continue the California Winemaker series today in the company of Tyler Thomas of Starlane Vineyard and Dierberg Vineyard. Tyler tells us his wine origin story before taking a deep dive into the transition from Botany to Viticulture and Enology. He talks Dierberg Family and Vineyard intro, introduces us to the key staff and the estate philosophy. We talk Santa Barbara County history and its pioneers, take a deep dive into the Dierberg family culture and 250-year plan, talk Santa Barbara geography and take a vineyard deep dive. We discuss the pros and cons of marketing around a single grape variety. He shares some of their sustainable farming practices before closing on improving quality into the future. Enjoy.
You know, my journey into wine really started as a young man, like in high school, and especially in that my dad's mother was French, and she spent most of my life, but in the United States. But all of our visits at home and our own home culture in terms of food that we ate, the way we celebrated meals was wine on the table. So I kind of grew up in the middle part of the United States, but which was not known for its wine. But I had this sort of introduction to kind of a European food and wine culture. So in college, I became interested. The thing that really grabbed my attention was some Côte de Rhône wines that, I was just fascinated as a botanist. I was studying botany, that a plant could could create something that tasted like pepper and cured meats, And that started the journey. And I just wanted to keep exploring the wine world and had no idea at the time that somebody would pay you to make wine for them. And I didn't learn that until after I'd finished a degree and a graduate degree in plant science and traveled around the world for a while. I happened very serendipitously to meet some winemakers in New Zealand. And I was like, wait a minute, I was at this festival and I was like, they're just paying you to make wine for them? I'm like, yeah, mate, that's how it works. I just think I had it in my head that everybody was sort of this vigneron, small oiling farmer that made wine. And so my wife and I, we got married pretty young and got back to the States. And it's like, how do you get into the wine industry? And we decided to take a path through, education. So I went back to school at UC Davis. I got a master's in viticulture and enology. And then had the good fortune to start my career in Napa with Hyde de Villaine Wines, which was a partnership between the Hyde family and Aubert de Villaine and his wife, Pamela, who are cousins by marriage with the Hyde family. And that's how I got into it. And 9 or 10 years after working in Napa, I came down here in Santa Barbara County, and I've been here for about 10 years now.
Amazing. And it's really caught my attention, I guess, that first degree really and botany, because I'm kind of racking my brains through the sort of more than 500 or so interviews that I've done. But what one topic and one first degree that keeps coming up is chemistry. A lot of chemists, they then make that transition, but I don't think that I've actually come across botanists that's come across, and it can be a fairly short piece. But I'm just curious about reflecting on I guess how well does a botany degree set you up for a viticulture and enology degree?
It actually, especially with hindsight, set me up very well. And
Mm.
particularly because one of the things I enjoyed most about studying plant science was actually the physiology. In my graduate degree, I focused on kind of molecular physiology, but I wasn't so much into plant identification or kind of the horticulture side, but the physiology of like how plants functioned, I found fascinating. And that translated really well to
Mm.
my graduate degree at UC Davis. I actually took coursework that was more enology focused, but all of my master's thesis and research was in grapeberry physiology. And as a winemaker, what we produce, particularly as an estate producer at Starlane and Dierberg Vineyard,
Mm.
we're trying to produce a wine that is reflective of the place. And I know a lot of people say that, but what that means is we need to pay attention to how the vine is responding to its environment, whether it's the soil that it's in or the climate that it's in. It affects the physiology of the vine. And so I definitely have found myself, especially in contrast to your point, I had colleagues that I was in graduate school with at Davis who had a PhD in chemistry from Yale. One had a master's in chemistry from Stanford. And there was, and American winemakers, I think, definitely tend to have a winemaking centric approach. But then I went and worked for Europeans who had a very vineyard centric approach. And my old mentor, Stefan, used to say, make the wine the vineyard's asking you to make. Well, you need to understand the physiology of the vine to even begin to try to understand what that even means. And so I actually ended up feeling like I had an advantage over some of my colleagues because I began to learn that a lot of winemakers that were 10, 15, 20 years my senior had ideas about the physiology of the vine that frankly weren't aligned with what we understood about real physiology of the vine, and would make choices that were either more expensive to farm without having an impact on quality. And so it really affected the lens with which I began and kind of have had throughout my career.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's it again. It just felt like something to definitely acknowledge, and as you say, I guess the chemistry maybe naturally fits slightly better to the winemaking side of things, and as you say,
Right.
this you were as I like to say, probably skating to where the puck was going to go in terms of our changes, really, as you say, in terms of I guess a lot of winemakers I interview, talking about that. Wine is made in the vineyard, and exactly making the wine that the kind of the conditions and the fruit is kind of asking you to make. So let's head back to the real world, I guess, and your job really, and your role. You kind of brought us, I guess, up to the front door really of where you're working now, and give us a snapshot, because I believe there's been various changes over the last sort of 10 years or so. So maybe let's get that part of the story before delving a little bit deeper.
Sure. Yeah, and there have been some. It's been this long journey of small changes that have gotten us to where we are now. So I met the Dierberg family, over 10 years ago, and then decided to join them in 2013 here in Santa Barbara County. So we're about 4.5 hours south of San Francisco, 2.5 hours kind of, it's technically northwest of Los Angeles. And, it's a terrific wine growing region. What really attracted me to the opportunity was that they had planted these three different estates, two that we focus on now, in two totally different parts, totally different climates that really represents Santa Barbara County's uniqueness. It has these what we call transverse mountain ranges that run east-west. And it's the only place in the entire western North American coastline where the mountain ranges run so distinctly east-west. And it creates this very linear relationship between your proximity to the ocean and temperature. So within short ranges, you have, Fahrenheit, 15 degrees temperature changes during the growing season. And so I was kind of attracted to the area. But what really sealed it for me was the Dierberg Vineyard, or the Dierberg's long-term vision. And so going back to my romantic roots of these vignerons toiling in the vineyard, I really felt like the epitome of truly pursuing great wine was having to be an estate producer that got to manage the farming in-house and having a long-term view. So the Dierbergs, I asked Jim Dierberg what his 30-year plan was. And he's like, well, I don't have a 30-year plan. I have a 250-year plan. And this is about multi-generational craftsmanship. And I was really attracted to that idea. I now work with the second generation, and I am the president and winemaker of the operations. So I'm make the wines for the Dierberg brand, which is all of our coastal, cooler climate wines, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. I also make the wine for the Star Lane Vineyard, which is its own distinct estate and in a totally different part of the county that has completely different climate and soil types. So, I manage the operations for all of those, both in the vineyard and the winemaking.
Very cool. And I think as well, the natural, curiosity that I have as well, and you've hinted already at some of this, is it's actually the other people there, because I think it's always, it's always right really to bring, some of the key other protagonists into the conversation as well. So I think, if you wouldn't mind kind of, virtually introducing us to them, that would also be great. Yeah,
sure. So we've got, there's been a lot of, not transition too recently, but I have a counterpart whose name's Peter Baedeker, who is the estate managing director of all the sales and marketing. He joined us about a year and a half ago. And we just immediately had a good kinship on how to kind of approach the sort of changing marketplace, particularly in the United States. And then Jamin Dierberg, who I believe you've met at least virtually, she's the daughter-in-law of the founders. So she's married to Michael Dierberg, who is the second generation owner, along with his sister, Ellen. So Ellen and Michael Dierberg are now the folks that Peter and I report to. And Jamin Dierberg, Michael's wife, manages all of our export, particularly in Asia. So she's from Shanghai, and she went to university in Japan and is fluent in both Chinese and Japanese. And so she's done a great job for us of building a really distinct market and building the brands, particularly in Japan, where we export a decent amount of both of our brands, Star Lane and Dierberg. And then, of course, we've got an assistant. I got assistant winemaker. We got a vineyard team where it is in-house, director of viticulture. And, we really, when I first interviewed with the Dierbergs, they asked me for sort of a single page statement of my winemaking philosophy. And one of the things I noted was that great wine is made by having, it's kind of made in the vineyard and in the mind and with your people. So it's having a great site, it's understanding those sites and making the right decisions, and then having a team of people that are committed to doing quality work, not just for that outcome of, this wine tastes great, but when you rack that wine on a barrel, you have a personal discipline of doing it excellently. Or if you're out selling the wine, right, you have a personal discipline of understanding what good sales and marketing is and trying to do that excellently. Because I believe that will beget good wine, right? Like high quality is trying to do all aspects of the business well. And so I appreciate you asking me about the team. Actually, a lot of times people don't inquire about that. So.
Yeah, well, of course, it's there's many hands make light work, I guess. And I think, also, what I'm also really curious about, and I think it does, kind of deserve a little bit of exploration as well. Is really, I guess it's two parallel things really. So it's, I'm always very curious about when the kind of baton is passed to a second generation, and just to kind of understand, I guess, what changes and kind of what stays the same. But then equally, I think given I think in some ways, I know that there was an older history, but I think in some ways the kind of uniquely young history of modern wine production in California, it means that you're within, again, a couple of generations of the sort of pioneers of grape growing, and the people who kind of led the Renaissance. So I wonder if you wouldn't, I guess, and through the lens of Dierberg, connect those two. I guess that kind of pioneer generation, maybe talking to some of their innovations and challenges, through to again, now we're into second generation. What are the kind of the new ideas and the changes and things that you've seen coming through?
Yeah, great question. And I'll start with the pioneers. I think Jim and Mary Dierberg, our founders, really were pioneers and in some ways part of some of those early generations that we hear more about, say in Napa and Sonoma, because they've actually owned a winery since the 70s in Missouri called Hermanhoff Winery, just about an hour and a half west of where I grew up, St. Louis, Missouri. And they just developed this love for Bordeaux varietals, and particularly Bordeaux wines. Jim became an avid collector. And so they began looking for land to develop in the 80s. But what maybe was different about them is that they didn't just default to Napa or Sonoma. They were very patient in kind of eyeing what they wanted. They were close to actually closing a deal with the Bordeaux Chateau, and decided that perhaps having the family split between America and France wasn't going to be best for their family. But then it was in the early to mid 90s that they discovered the Starlane property where I am right now. And it's funny, after all of that time, about 10 to 12 years of looking, they spent about an hour at Starlane and were like, this is the place. There was something magical in the sense. And so they were part of the early development of this part of San Bernardino County. So further east in the county, they were really the first ones to develop the area for Cabernet. There was Cabernet in the county, but it was slowly migrating away from the cooler areas to where we are, which is a little bit warmer. And they were one of the first ones to put Cabernet here. We've since had some interaction with Michael Benedict, who is one of the early pioneers of Pinot Noir in the Santa Rita Hills in the 70s. And so you're right. We have this touch point to some of the first. He, by the way, was a botanist as well, Michael Benedict. We do have these, it's really neat to kind of be connected to the thought process of some of those original founders. And I think that as we move into the second generation, one of the things that's been great about the Dierberg family is they have experience doing this in their other business, which is running a bank. Michael Dierberg and his sister are fourth generation in helping run their bank. And I think to get that far, you have to learn some hard lessons about a good way to pass the baton and maybe the wrong way to pass the baton. And they have a real passion for family businesses in general. It's a big focus of their bank business. And so Jim and Mary did a great job of passing the baton to Michael and Ellen. And they made it very clear to me, all of them, Michael and Ellen now have the baton. Everyone else is giving opinions. They give directives. And I think just having that clear line there allows for really good interaction still with the founders. And Jim is still incredibly interested in what's getting planted, what changes we're making. And I think what Michael and Ellen did was help clear up communication in that regard. And, they really have a lot of confidence in some of the work that their parents did originally, but I think they have kind of freed us up a little bit more to kind of do some tests and figure some things out where we believe we can make better impacts, whether it's quality in the vineyard or even in our marketing and branding. We've historically been very private about the property, but but have decided maybe it's time to open that up a little bit. So the changes have been subtle, and I think important. But it's also helped, like, because they haven't been dramatic. It's been a very smooth transition. I think a lot of times that transition to the second generation can be very difficult and disruptive. And it's felt just progressive, like that we were on this path going forward since my arrival, especially. And we just kind of continued on that path with a little bit more freedom.
Yeah. No, very cool. Very cool. It's, again, I'm always fascinated again. Yeah. When even more so when it's, within the family, and, you can, I guess keep those connections, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, and I'm sure it's also a help that they've got that other experience in the banking sector as well, and this is really I like the way this is evolving. I think the natural place to take us really is kind of out into the vineyards, really, and the site that you're working with there. I mean, it's very interesting how these series work out sometimes, actually, because just in the exactly previous episode, because I'm going to release these in the order that they're recorded, I was actually speaking with Will Costello last night, and he was talking about the Bien Nacido estate and the growing conditions, and exactly as you've hinted at there in terms of the transverse mountains and those sorts of growing conditions. So I think it's great, because it then kind of gives me the opportunity to, of course, ask you to talk to your site there and kind of orientate us, because everyone has a different perspective, a different way of communicating that. But it also then, does give you and does give the listener kind of the benefit of really two sites maybe to contrast as well, and to maybe put those sort of side by side, as well as, of course, focusing on your view of your own site. So maybe starting, as I like to call it, from a sort of helicopter size view or a scale view, just putting your property into context, and then bringing the helicopter right down and kind of what it's like standing there on a day like today, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So, the helicopter, the high view of Santa Barbara County, we're in that part of California, if you looked at the coastline, where it's like going pretty straight down north to south as you go south from San Francisco. And then it takes this immediate bend to the east. And there's like an elbow there, in an L shape almost. And that's exactly where Santa Barbara County is. And that's where those mountains turn, and we have these open valleys to the west, and the ocean is very cold there, and so as the inland air heats up, it pulls that ocean air in, and you just create this kind of trio, really, from north to south and then east to west, of regions that really makes for sometimes I think the vintners here struggle to solidify around a single marketing idea, because unlike, say, Napa, where everything is Cabernet, really, we aren't producing these different varieties because we like to ferment things as winemakers that are different. It's because it would be unwise to grow Pinot Noir in the eastern part of the county, and yet that's only a 30-minute drive for me. So if I zoom down to I'll start where I'm sitting, which is the Star Lane Vineyard, and which produces Bordelais varietal wines under the Star Lane brand. It's one of the most amazing vineyards I've actually seen in California. It's a 2.5 mile, let's say 4 kilometer stretch from the front of the property to the back. It goes up about 250 to 275 meters from the lowest part to the highest, and it has about 4 distinct soil series on it. And so that elevation gain changes temperature regimes from the bottom to the high part. And the length of the vineyard, you've got fog playing a role at the front of the vineyard, not so much at the back of the vineyard. We have, should I do hectares? Maybe 35 hectares of Cabernet alone. across all of those different soil series. And so everything we ferment here is done by block and separate. And so we make 20 to 22 Cabernet lots a year just from this property, only to bottle 2. And then, if I drive 35 minutes or so west, directly west, in the middle of the day, in the growing season anyway, say July or June, July, August, the temperature will go down about 15 degrees in the middle of the day. And so now I'm standing on a hillside vineyard in what we call the Santa Rita Hills, only about 13 miles or 20 plus kilometers from the ocean. And, the high temperatures are much lower. The vineyard is influenced tremendously by fog. That vineyard is much smaller. What was interesting to me when I first started was I thought because it was smaller, it would be easier to farm, which has not proven to be true. The soil types are just as diverse. So the water demands and the water use efficiency of the plant is different based on the soil texture and series that we have there. And so, we do grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay there. They all fall under the Dierberg label. And it's neat for me because it's totally different hats you have to put on during harvest. It's like the sort of archetype and nature of Cabernet, even when you're trying to make a wine in place, you still have to have some dream or some concept of what you think a kind of pleasurable, distinct wine is from that place. And it's totally different than Pinot Noir. And you have to make sure you keep those separate in your mind. Otherwise you might make a Pinot Noir that is like a cab person making Pinot Noir, and that's not our goal. We have different inspirations. So it's a neat place. It's a really neat place to make wine. Grow.
Yeah, and I guess it would also, I always obviously hear these different descriptions, and I'm always listening out for certain words and kind of certain themes, and it was very interesting, talking about the different plantings that people have there, and the fact that in Napa it's kind of mainly Cabernet. And I'm just curious, do you think that kind of matters? That I hear a lot of regions around the world. Maybe they say what's going to be our kind of superstar grape or our style. I'm just curious, with a again a modern outward looking winery, how much does it matter? That there isn't necessarily a single grape variety to kind of hang your hat on.
Yeah, I think it definitely matters in that I think it is more challenging, but I think it's also an opportunity to make our region a little more distinct. Mm-hmm. So there are some threads even across varieties as different as say Pinot Noir and Cabernet. The Cabernet here is not, in my opinion, it's as world class as anything people might enjoy, but it does have a distinct mark that's say different than the richness and weight of say a Napa Cabernet. Mm-hmm. I think we have more of a kinship with some of the Santa Cruz Mountain Cabernets that like Ridge famously produces, and so I think what I like to tell people is Santa Barbara County is for wine lovers. We can't necessarily hang our hat on a single variety because of the diversity. And so that is the challenge of it's much easier to market something when it's simple and one thing. And so as a region, how do we communicate about ourselves? Because we're all sort of in some ways saying something different, right? I make Syrah, I make Cab, I make Pinot. Mm-hmm. But in reality, there's a lot of world-class wine here. It has a fresher feel in general across the varieties. It's in some respects still a little undiscovered. And so there's a kind of quiet ruralness to the area. And, we've been trying to beat that drum to people in the Los Angeles area. And it's like, you're not very far away from this place that's, in terms of wine, perhaps just west of France, like has a kinship with a European orientation, and yet it's in your backyard. And if you love wine, if you really love wine, this is a great place to come visit. You can taste, like even us, right? Like we're pouring, Pinot Noir alongside Cabernet across two brands at our cellar door, and I don't know. I love wine. I think that would be pretty fun to be able to do.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's one of those topics that I think we could sort of debate for hours and even longer, probably with a glass of wine if we were sat together. And I just think also it's just it strikes me as I actually kind of a double-edged sword. I think it can of course be an advantage that you get that peg in people's brains, and you're forever kind of associated with I don't know, champagne and sparkling wine or whatever. But it's so clear, and but I think also that there is just something personally very appealing about that kind of almost like a slight barrier to entry. Just in terms of, okay, I need to learn a little bit more. Okay, it's about the coolness of the region. It's about the diversity of the soils. That's then going to give rise to lots of different microsites and lots of maybe people interpreting their little bit of land very differently, and maybe that much more diversity, and interesting that there are there are familiar grape varieties, but to kind of pegged to and to say, okay, Syrah and Cabernet, but then I'm sure that there are some sites where, as you say, maybe some of those undiscovered sites, people have sort of planted different things, and things that maybe they may not have thought to plant if it was a one white and one red type variety location. It feels to me as though it's more interesting actually in the long term, because it seems to not constrain people so much, but I totally get that that does have its challenges in terms of some of the communication, I guess, and marketing.
And I think you're right, but it does. Another thing I think about is how it does create tremendous value in our wines, I believe. So, for example, I was just in Napa a couple of weeks ago for a conference on water use efficiency of plants and irrigation strategies in the face of drought, extended drought periods, and things like that. And I still have a ton of friends up there and colleagues. So we spent our director of viticulture and I spent an extra day touring vineyards. And there was a couple vineyards we saw that I think with modern viticultural understanding, you would not normally choose to put Cabernet there. Just from like what's going to grow best here, and close to the river, deep fertile soil. Like your first instinct would not be Cabernet. But both of these colleagues said, what else would we possibly plant economically? Right? And so you have these grapes going into this area that still produces great value for that region. But are you truly getting the best, say bang for your pound or for your dollar, given that they are like doing it for economic reasons, not necessarily. And I totally get it. If I were them, I'd be doing the same thing. But I think that is kind of what is unique. And one of the things that's unique and special about this area is that the vines are going in the ground that they think are best for that dirt, and climate, period. And at least that's what's happened originally here in the pioneering stage. And we're really only entering our second generation of vines and growers, maybe a third generation in one or two examples. So it creates tremendous value in that fruit that's coming off the vine, because we get a really good quality and maybe not quite at the same level of price point.
Yeah, love it, love it, and I got to keep us moving along, I guess. And I want
Yeah.
to also give you the chance, because I think from your background and what you've already started to share, would really be, I think, be fascinating to. Again, it will only be a snapshot, but yeah, so, some insight into maybe some interesting viticultural practices, and I can see already, there's some very interesting, sustainability angle here in terms of the kind of crop management and animals in the pasture. There's a ton of examples. So, but I'm going to be kind of mean and ask you to maybe focus in on, I guess, the broader philosophy, and then maybe delve into one or two of those examples.
Sure. So, with a multi-generational plan, we by default need to be sustainable. Sustainable meaning we work to run our farming. We are cognizant of our inputs, what we're taking away, and the business and the people in the business in such a way that the business survives for multiple generations. And in order for us to survive, we need the land. What we're crafting is coming out of the land. And so we are constantly working to understand, how can we minimize, say, carbon output or maximize carbon capture, because everything you do comes with a trade-off, right? So using sheep in the vineyard eliminates a tractor pass, which can increase compaction and, of course, comes with more carbon burn. But maybe it results in a different trade-off where you maybe have to do an extra tractor pass. So, a lot of this sort of sustainable farming is just that, having that mindset, where we do trials where we're trying to see, can we build organic matter this way and minimize tractor passes? We purchased an electric tractor. You mentioned animals. We have bees, we have sheep. And, we also, in the winery, we track our water use. We're in a water poor area of California. So we need to be really cognizant of our water use. One of the things we discovered that's unique about what Jim Dierberg did when he planted the vineyard was we have own rooted vines, so ungrafted vines. We don't have phylloxera that we've observed yet. And what happened was those vines were not only producing our best Cabernet, they were the most sustainably farmed because they had the most vigor, which usually don't want too much vigor, like I was mentioning, that Napa Valley river bottom stuff. But in our area, we have a really low vigor site with not much water. So actually having more vigor allowed us to irrigate a lot less, and yet we still got viable crop with high quality. Well, we've now taken that principle and said, well, we don't want to take too much risk and have too much own rooted everywhere. But there's a principle there of choosing a rootstock maybe that encourages more vigor. We think we can cut our total water use in the future by 30 to 40% by using the first generation's knowledge we gained to pass on to the second generation of vines, saying we can actually change our rootstocks, not hurt quality, maybe improve quality and decrease our inputs. So it's that kind of mentality that, you're right. There's so many specifics we could go into, but at the basic level, you have to be thinking that way all the time. And the Dierbergs set that by having this 250-year plan. It sets the philosophy of the company, right away.
Amazing. And really, it has to be in closing now. I'll really, ask you to look ahead. I mean, I know that, you and collectively, you do have lots of plans for the future and responses to the kind of different forecasts for climate change. And maybe you've kind of already started to allude to some of that. But maybe, encourage you to, I guess, project forward into that, longer plan, and again, maybe open out the discussion to kind of, what else you think is, we should be aware of, we should be sort of looking out for in terms of what you're doing there.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for the opportunity to do this and to answer that question, because this is a kind of a first in my career. This is my 10th. I've done 10 vintages here now. This is my 10th year, and before that it was like 5 years and 5 years. And as a scientist, I've always said, scientist winemaker, it's like you need at least 3 points to make a trend, right? And that's really not a great sample size. Well, in winemaking, that's 3 years, right? And so you really need like 5 to 7 years to even begin to feel like you have an understanding of a property. And when you're trying to craft wines of place, whether it be Cabernet with Starlane or Pinot Noir with Dierberg, now I'm 10 years in, and I look back and I think, well, I thought we made some great wines in my first couple of years, but we really started hitting our stride in like 2018, 2019. And now I think looking forward from what that meant to hit our stride, it's informing, as I just alluded to about sustainability, how can we are in a position where we need to start redeveloping some of our blocks. Some are hanging on, and we hope they'll hang on for a long time. How can we make a better decision by improving not just our sustainability, but our quality because of what we've learned? And when I first started working here, I talked to one of my early mentors, Aubert de Villaine, who runs Domaine Romanée-Conti, and was like, he said to me once at a dinner, he's like, we're making better wines now than we did 40 years ago. And I stopped him. I'm like, give me the top 3 reasons why. What's responsible for most of that outcome? And the 2 that really resonated with me were we're a state, we control our own material, and we control our own farming. And what I've learned, that was when I first started here, and what I've learned over the last 10 years is how true that is. Because what it is allowing us to do by controlling those 2 things is to control our future in making it more sustainable in how we redevelop and then how we control quality. And so we have some early returns on small blocks we've redeveloped with these more vigorous rootstocks. When I say I think we can cut water use by 30 or 40%, that's not a guess. That's based on real examples. And then we have our first crop off those the last 2 years, and it's very exciting because we're seeing right away improvements in depth, color, complexity, and we thought we were doing pretty well before. So, I don't know. My wife and I moved down here thinking if it's a 10-year gig, like it's worth the move, And so here I am 10 years in, and I'm just excited for the future and looking forward and building resiliency to what they're forecasting, our climate might experience, which is, more severe heat waves and longer periods of drought mixed with big rain events. And I think we have an understanding of at least how to continue to tinker to be resilient toward those things, without really having to like change varieties or do things that other people have talked about. There's so many viticultural tools available to us to kind of, at least for the next generation of vines, stick with what we have, but make subtle improvements that I think will keep us resilient and on a path forward we'll see. Hopefully I can make the same statement Aubert made to me that in 40 years we're making better wines than we are now.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Tyler Thomas of Starlane Vineyard and Dierberg Vineyard. Make sure you visit starlanevineyard.com and dierbergvineyard.com, where you can learn more about the projects and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the California Winemaker series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/514. You can find links to all 4 episodes from the series in the description below. And I thoroughly recommend listening to episode 513 with Will Costello, which along with this episode 514 form a mini Santa Barbara series within a series. Next time on the Interpreting Wine California Winemaker series, in the 4th and final series episode, I'll be speaking with Joan Counts and Steve Millier of Ironstone Vineyards. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.